Every year, production companies pour billions of dollars into massive theatrical spectacles. From Hollywood blockbusters to sprawling Bollywood epics, modern cinema functions as a high-stakes engine of commercial entertainment. Christian missionaries poured the actual foundation for this global industry, long before the first major studios were ever built. To see how that happened, we have to look at Bombay in 1910. The city was bustling, and a man named Dadasaheb Phalke was quietly falling apart. Phalke was a brilliant artist, but his life was defined by tragedy. He was drowning in debt, struggling to find steady work, and mourning the death of his first wife, who had recently succumbed to the plague. He had tried to run a photography studio, but he ran into a stubborn local superstition. People believed that a camera physically drained the life out of anyone who stood in front of it. Without subjects to photograph, his business collapsed. Bankrupt and depressed, Phalke went for an evening walk to clear his head. He noticed a small makeshift tent and decided to step inside. That quiet attempt to escape his own despair would inadvertently launch a billion-dollar empire. Inside that dark tent, a small crowd sat on wooden chairs, staring at a white cloth. Phalke was watching a strange Western invention, moving pictures. The silent film was called The Life of Christ. Phalke sat completely mesmerized as figures from a foreign religion walked and breathed on the canvas right in front of him. This Western film reached an Indian tent in 1910 through an organized international supply chain that began decades earlier. By the 19th century, field missionaries like David Livingstone faced a severe logistical bottleneck. They were trying to explain complex theology across massive linguistic divides in Africa and Asia. To bypass the language barrier, they turned to visual storytelling. If they could project an image, they could communicate an idea to hundreds of people at once, regardless of the local dialect. They relied on a piece of hardware called the magic lantern to project painted glass slides onto mud walls in dark rooms. For these missionaries, projected visuals were essential hardware for mass communication, translating complex ideas instantly. The technology evolved rapidly. In 1889, Thomas Edison and W.K.L. Dixon invented the kinetoscope, successfully capturing continuous motion on film. Early motion pictures were an isolated experience. Customers paid a few cents to look down into an individual wooden cabinet. Edison tried to give the patents for this new technology to his local church, but rigid religious institutions rejected the machinery, dismissing it just as they had initially dismissed the printing press and the radio. Out in the field, grassroots missionaries recognized the camera's power to bridge cultural divides and convince audiences. Because institutional leadership passed on the technology, the actual pioneers pushing film hardware into remote corners of the globe were Protestant organizations and the Salvation Army. The Salvation Army established dedicated cinematograph departments to produce and distribute their own original content. Between 1897 and 1906, these organizations funded a massive export of films detailing the life of Christ, shipping them from hubs in the U.S. and France. In 1904, the Church Mission Society sponsored cameraman Edward Cash to travel throughout India, projecting them to local populations. That well-funded, highly organized global media network is the reason a silent film about Jesus arrived in a makeshift tent in Bombay 6 years later. Which brings us back to 1910. Phalke is sitting in that dark tent, watching the story of Christ unfold. As he watched the screen, his mind raced. He realized that if this machinery could project Western religious history, it could project Indian mythology. He became instantly obsessed with replacing Jesus and Mary with Krishna and Yashoda. To finance the equipment, he pawned his second wife's jewelry, leaving her with only her wedding necklace. After 3 years of work, he released Raja Harishchandra in 1913. It was India's first mythological film. By translating the missionary playbook into his own cultural language, Phalke planted the seed for what would grow into the largest film industry on Earth. The drive to use cinema for persuasion continued well past those early iterations. Decades later, a team of 450 scholars and researchers collaborated to create the 1979 Jesus film, building a precise visual translation tool. This chart compares the linguistic reach of modern cinema. While a standard Hollywood blockbuster might be translated into a few dozen languages, the Jesus film has been dubbed into over 1,800. That ongoing push for global distribution earned the project a Guinness World Record. Cinema is like fire. a neutral piece of engineering. You can use it to sell tickets, or you can use it to share the divine. Modern film is dominated by commerce, but its foundational DNA was coded by faith.